Good morning. So it's 9 o'clock, time to start, because we should stick to the time. We're supposed to finish at 12 o'clock, and we have many speakers today. So thanks to everybody who came to this meeting this morning physically. And it's important to emphasize this is a hybrid meeting, so we have a number of participants who are joining us today online. I understand that over 50 participants are expected to join us online, and currently we have about 30 present. My name is Marius Lesdinis. I work in Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development. However, I'm here today, I must say, in my private capacity. And I think the main reason why I'm here today is because I'm Lithuanian, number one. And number two, I'm a former forester or trained forester. Maybe there's no such a thing as former forester. I think once you're a forester, you always remain one in your heart, even though if you change your careers. So it's a big pleasure to be here today, and thanks so much for the organizers for inviting me to moderate this event. It's the second time. We all have met in December 2019, and I had a pleasure to moderate event organized by PROFOR network back then. And speaking of the PROFOR network, even though Mika Mustonen is not on the agenda, I would like to invite you, Mika, to say a few words about PROFOR network and to introduce very briefly yourselves and what you do, the scope of your work. Please, Mika.
Thank you, Marius. And on behalf of the PROFOR network and as the coordinator of the PROFOR network, I very much welcome you all. So some words about the PROFOR network. So it is a research network including research organizations from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And the objective of the network is providing science-based policy support for sustainable management of forests. And the network is co-funded with Nordic Forest Research. This is our second event as Marius mentioned, in Brussels. And over the last few years, we have published a policy brief and contributed to the discussion on the new EU forest strategy and other policy preparation. And in this event today, we are focusing especially on forests and biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and raw material supply. And this all will come in the proper pitches in the program. So this was shortly about PROFOR. Thank you very much. And I give over to Marius.
Thank you so much, Mika. So the title of this event is Trilemma of Providing Biodiversity, Carbon Sequestration, and Raw Materials for Europe. So these are three functions, but all of us who have been dealing for many years with forestry, we know that multifunctional forestry is about combining multiple functions of multiple interests of society. And all these functions or how we meet them depend probably on the time and also on the scale. So therefore, in this workshop, organizers have identified the three important issues. However, I anticipate what we'll be discussing today is also how to have a process which can combine these multiple functions and try to balance over time, because these functions change. And of course, this is a reoccurring question. I think many of us who have followed these events, we have been discussing combination of these functions over many, many years. Now, a few technical, practical announcements before we start our work. You see the program, and we should have some household rules. However, the main point is to keep attention, keep focus, and understand that it's a hybrid event. So we're you're not only addressing the audience here, but also audience online. Then also, unfortunately, we'll not have questions immediately after the interventions, but we'll try to cover all the questions in the panel discussion. So even though we have three panelists in the panel today, all the PROFOR speakers, they'll be around. And if anybody has questions after their presentation, please take note, keep it in mind, and then we can address these questions in the panel discussion. Mia and Ellen, some of the organizers, Ellen is here. She will keep track of the participants online, and then please, participants online, feel free to write your questions in the chat, I think. Correct, Ellen? And then Ellen and Mika will probably summarize these questions, try to put it together, and then address it to the right speakers. And then definitely let's stick to the allocated time so we can finish on time for lunch. And we continue with other duties in the afternoon. So without further delay, I would like to move to our main speaker, the key speaker in the opening event, Simonas. Simonas Šatūnas, he's currently head of the cabinet of our Lithuanian commissioner, Virginijus Sinkevičius, and he has relatively recently joined the cabinet. And of course, all of you know that our commissioner is in charge of oceans, in charge of environment, and in charge of forest as well. Simonas has been in this job for the last 4 months, but before then he was our ambassador in EU representation to the Lithuanian representation to the EU. Before, he had multiple assignments. He's a very experienced diplomat, and I was very interested and excited to find out that Simonas was also Deputy Minister for the Energy. So I think this is very relevant. It's an important asset for Simonas, I think, in his current job, and especially this is an important link when we talk about forestry and combining renewable energy priorities and other priorities, biodiversity conservation and so on. So without further delay, Simonas, I have an honor to invite you. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Marius. Yes, so as Marius mentioned, I'm also Lithuanian, but here not in a private capacity, in official capacity. And thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you for having a chance for my commissioner to express the views and the views from his portfolio. So first of all, a very good morning, and thank you, PROFOR, for having us here today. And water regulators and for climate change adaptation and mitigation. They are absolutely indispensable for a transition to circular bioeconomy and healthy society. But as we all know, on average, forests are not in a good state, and that's really true for the boreal regions. Forests, in our view, are suffering from the biodiversity loss and climate change effects. The consequences are increasingly taking their toll on the forest stability and productivity. And we all remember in 2018, more than 23,000 hectares of forests burned in Sweden. And the assistance that was deployed to fight the forest fires was the largest European civil growing, which makes the seminar case and the discussions and the topics from various angles even more actual and very timely. And to meet the growing demands and expectations, we need really bigger, healthier, and more resilient multifunctional forests in Europe. And in our view, they are absolutely key to a sustainable and climate neutral future. The sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change highlights that the world and Europe has only a very brief and really rapidly closing window to secure the livable future. And it calls for the urgent actions for the restoration of degraded ecosystems to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and notably by restoring degraded wetlands and rivers, forests, and agricultural ecosystems. This confirms once more that we need really to address the nature crisis together with the climate crisis. And both crises obviously are interdependent, and they need the solutions. And to address we need to ensure the healthy ecosystems in the future. Therefore, the Commission, as we already discussed a little bit, and obviously you read everywhere, that the Commission is finalizing the legislative proposal on a new nature restoration law, which hopefully will be finalized soon. And it was announced and is a part of the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030. The proposal will aim to restore degraded ecosystems with the highest potential to sequester the carbon and prevent a reduce of impact of the natural disasters, including the forests, both inside and outside the Annex 1 of the Habitat Directive.
Back online. Sorry about this technical break and misunderstanding. So, Simonas, please.
Yes, so let's ignore that and let's focus on the topic. So as I was mentioning, non-wood products already deliver about 20% of the market value from the forest through the ecotourism or sustainable production of non-wood. And growing chaga mushrooms on the beech trees in Finland colleagues maybe can testify, for example, really generates quite a lot of income. This market, I understand, or the statistics shows that it's about 22 billion euros and grows annually from 8 to 14%. This is why the forest strategy aims to give the priority and a lot of attention to non-wood bioeconomy to push and facilitate the payment for the ecosystem service schemes. In addition, EU forest strategy for 2030 aims to unlock the full potential of the forest to deliver climate and biodiversity ambitions hand in hand with securing livelihoods of our communities and support a sustainable forest bioeconomy. And as you all know, this is a flagship initiative of the Green Deal with the evident links to very other important initiatives, especially with the climate and energy policies in the context of the Fit for 55 package and the new biodiversity strategy. It covers the whole forest cycle and promotes many services that forests can provide in a balanced manner, whether they are social, economic, or environmental in the nature. And thriving rural areas and the sustainable bioeconomy is absolutely a key priority in the strategy. The overarching goal here must be, in our view, transition to a sustainable and circular bioeconomy, where the biodiversity and climate change values and targets are fully integrated in the key sectors. From the outset. Policy coherence and integration, in our view, are essential here. And we must do this in a really smart way for a very long term, rather than focusing on the short term or the quick wins. This is in general principle of the sustainable circular bioeconomy that applies to all the sectors. The contribution of the forest to the climate mitigation comes not only from the harvest wood product and the substitution on greenhouse gas intensive materials or fossil fuels, but also from the carbon stocked in the forest land. Harvested wood products can validly contribute, and it's not a secret. It's to preserve the carbon, but their lifespan is, we need to admit, is never or rarely as long as that of the trees, which can store the hundreds carbon for hundreds of years or even a millennia in their soil. So the EU forest strategy aims to preserving the carbon in the long run, switching as far as possible from the short-lived towards the long-lived products. At the same time, it also recognizes that short-lived products, in the particular bioenergy, are important and will contribute to play a role in meeting the 55% emission reduction target by 2030, which is the target, and really to secure regular income for the forests where no other effective wood utilization is possible. However, it has to be in balance with the biodiversity and the climate change ambitions for the EU and follow the cascading principle, which indicates that woody mass is a finite resource and must be used in the sectors where it has the highest value added and the lowest environmental impact. Probably colleagues from Finland will testify, but I understand that Nature Resource Institute in Finland just published its latest that the forests in Finland has turned into net carbon source, which is really worrying. This development is largely due to increased logging of the forest, energy driving harvesting to really unprecedented level. In a similar way, probably also Estonian colleagues will testify that Estonian Environmental Agency just have showed that Estonian forest reserves are being depleted despite the positive growth rates. And reasons behind include the increase of the young forests and unsustainable levels of clear cutting. So we often hear that the argument that increased use of wood is the best response to the climate change because of the younger trees. And notably, fast-growing trees remove more carbon than the older ones. But in this logic really ignores the fact that burning wood emits more CO2 emissions per unit energy generated than the fossil fuels. And older trees stock more carbon, therefore providing more benefits for climate change and also for biodiversity. And it often increases air pollution. We also need to admit that that's a major impact in some areas, with the major impact on the air quality and human health. So we need to reconcile for timber and more generally biomass with EU biodiversity goals that we all been discussing and trying to achieve. And they will be key to ensure really multiple wins for biodiversity, for climate, zero pollution, and for the bioeconomy. More diverse forest means more resilient forests and more stable timber production and more carbon sequestration, flood control. As we see, it's becoming more and more accurate problem over Europe, more water purification and more recreation. And obviously, it's going to be in the interest of the forest industry and in the large of our society. So we can and must minimize the trade-offs between the forest ecosystems restoration and timber supply. By sound forest management, I'm sure that you will discuss it here today and have a lot of experience from some member states. And by really intensifying the upskilling and processing the residues of the new circular forest-based products. So at least from my commissioner's view, circular economy that we're trying to achieve in many other areas, more maybe industrial areas, have to have a special focus in forests as well. So nature absolutely is our best ally in our view to fight against the climate change, and really intensifying protection and restoration in a smart way. I want to stress in a smart way will not negatively, in our view, affect the overall availability of the timber for the bioeconomy. And we are convinced that we can reach the right balance. I'm sure you will try to discuss it today and to come into some conclusions between changing the negative trends in terms of the carbon sinks and stocks within the EU and better use of woody biomass for the bioeconomy. While discussing about the targets, we all need to find the right balance and to have a holistic and inclusive approach to the EU forests strategy, and it gives us opportunity to ensure that we make the best use of forest at the service of all the citizens and our foresters as well. So I wish you good luck, good discussions, and I think you will be able to find some good balances in trying to achieve the many goals or many targets what the forest can bring to us all. So good luck and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simonas. This is a very good scene setter, I think, for the event. And in fact, in my personal view, this attack demonstrates how important these questions in our debate is. And probably your speech was really in the interest of the hackers. I'm sure some of those were probably either logging extremists or environmental extremists or maybe climate radical activists. So, but I think we're fighting back these attacks, and probably we have a number of participants who have joined us also online. And thanks once again, Simonas. And if seriously, I'm sure that PROFOR would be happy anytime to serve as a reference point if you need any opinion on the forest research. We're talking about knowledge-based policy, so please always feel free to talk to the PROFOR network and to the experts. And next time when you visit Lithuania, I'm sure that PROFOR members of Lithuania will be happy to give you a tour in the forest and have it continue this debate, which you very well started this morning. Now, since we're behind the schedule, without any further delay, I would like to introduce our next speaker and my dear colleague, Gregorio de Villadias. He is a Deputy Head of Unit of the Unit Environmental Sustainability in the Director General for Agriculture and Rural Development. And Gregorio has a vast experience. He has worked on the rural development policy extensively. He was heavily involved in the latest CAP reform. He followed all the discussions with both Council and the European Parliament until the last minute, until the final agreement was done in June 2020. Gregorio, he is economist, as his background. He has specialized in rural development and international cooperation and has worked in several countries, such as Cuba, Bosnia and Herzegovina, United States, and Germany before. So Gregorio, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so Hope it works. Yes. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today and share some insights on thoughts from DG Agri as regards forest and the forestry and the forest strategy. As Mario said, the Deputy Head of Unit in the Environmental Sustainability Unit, and we have, among other responsibilities, the role of the task to follow up on the EU forest strategy and the forest related files, which are several and all very intense in the last weeks or even months or years. And therefore, now as you have seen already, this is a joint responsibility between DG Environment, DG Clima, and DG Agri. So we are trying to balance a bit the different objectives, the different interests, and the different approaches that we need, because as we all know, and this is repeated several times, the forest, and is the title of this conference today, they have a multifunctional role and they have to deliver on several fronts. They have socio-economic objectives, but they also have to preserve the rural vitality and the rural areas. So these are all important objectives of the forest and the forest community. And this is why we need many perspectives and many interests to get well balanced, so they all deliver at the same time. So the title of today's conference is actually this trilemma, no? This apparently difficulty to bring together three different perspectives. That's why it's called a trilemma, I guess, on biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and the raw material. So in other words, again, the three dimensions, or economy and the raw material and the circular economy, the climate, how we are gonna remove more carbon, how we are gonna sequester more carbon with the forest, and also biodiversity, how we restore the ecosystems, how we preserve this life that it's in the forests. So these are the three elements for which, let me very briefly, because we don't have much time, maybe later on for the discussion, but we think that the EU forest strategy is already catering for this. It's already addressing all these three elements, and we actually consider that there is no such problem to deliver on all these fronts, even though, as you rightly said, and the head of cabinet pointed out before, there are some trade-offs that we have to identify, we have to analyze, we have to minimize, and we have to come up with the smartest and the most efficient solution to deliver on all this. So very briefly, I will introduce a bit the main highlights of the EU forest strategy, which I'm sure that you are familiar with, but pointing out to the elements that will serve as a basis for the discussion, because there are many things already on the table that we can profit from and that can serve as food for thought and reflection later on. So first, the head of cabinet already pointed out, this is developed in a framework which was already announced in the Green Deal and has been later on put more on practice or more in detail in the forest strategy, in the biodiversity strategy, and very soon probably in the nature restoration law. So this is part of a package, an agenda for the future, a sustainable growth agenda, however you want to call it. It is, of course, not jeopardized by the current situation that is probably focusing more on other priorities, but just to be very clear, we still work on the basis of aim at having a Europe that it's carbon neutral, especially in the land sector in 2035. So there are big goals, big challenges, and of course, big crises that they cannot be forgotten. So that's why it is really important right now and right here to still think about the medium long term as all these instruments lay down. So there are four main elements, as you know, on the forest strategy. So first is this multifunctional role of the forest that I just mentioned, then the contribution of the foresters and the forest-based value chain to achieve the 2050 climate neutral economy. Now it's anticipated to 2035. Well, you all know that in the parliament there was a bit of a mess the other day. It is not clear what they approved, what they rejected, but it seems that at least the target for 2035, carbon neutral in the land sector, is well, is already agreed, and therefore, well, the basis for the work that we have ahead is quite clear, but still, of course, all this package is a bit pending the Parliament final agreement on these several packages that they got, and well, hopefully it will be solved very soon. But of course, we work under the assumption that that this will not be compromised. Let's see what the target finally is. But okay, and also ensuring that the forest ecosystems are restored, resilient, and adequately protected, and to strengthen the monitoring and the planning for the future. So these are the main building blocks of the strategy. As you know, there are then a bit more in depth. First, the big, let's sort of to say, socioeconomic dimension of the forest strategy. So it is very important that well, we promote the long-lived wood products, as my predecessor here was just mentioning. Let's try to change the patterns in the construction. Let's try to promote the material that are capable to store more carbon for the long term, and to also use this bioeconomy and the circular economy as a way to remove carbon from the atmosphere and a way to achieve the targets. We also have to pay attention to the bioenergy. You saw that there was a huge energy package launched recently by colleagues in DG Clima, DG Ener, but of course with the very strong involvement of other DGs, including Agri, on how to make best use of the bioenergy and best use of the methane and the biofuels. And of course, we repeat again and again, we have to respect and probably strengthen the sustainability criteria, because now they play counter, or they may constitute a trade-off with the food security. So we have also to decide what we need in the short and the long term. So we have to make sure that the deforestation and the sustainability criteria is there, and we can avoid unnecessary negative impacts. So the bioenergy is another very important trend that the forest strategy is proposing. Then the non-wood bioeconomy, so basically how to make the best use of tourism, and how forest, rural communities, Natura 2000 sites, forest owners, they can all play along, and they can all benefit from an increased added value in the forestry sector and the forester communities. Then we go for the dimension which is more related to environment, and there are some very important steps that we have already undertaken. So first of all, there is this legally binding instrument, which is the Nature Restoration Law, which is about to be adopted. Hopefully, it has been delayed for several reasons, and very soon we will have a legally binding proposal that will be discussed by the Council and the Parliament. Let's see how it ends up being, but at least the Commission has done his work, and we will be able to propose something for the restoration of the habitats, and with very clear impact on the forest sector also. Of course, we have to protect the primary and the growth forest. This is an important dimension that we'll know that has to be increased or has to be improved. Indicators, of course, are very important to monitor all these. The guidelines on biodiversity-friendly afforestation and reforestation is currently being discussed. You are probably very well aware what are the discussions and what are the main stakes. And the stakeholders are fully involved in developing these guidelines. The guidelines also for closer to nature forestry, exchange of practices, monitoring, and of course the 3 billion tree pledge on planting trees under the lemma, the right tree in the right place for the right purpose. So these are things that are in the forest strategy, that they play an important role. And then more specifically on the CAP, we have to ensure that the CAP plans are delivering on the forest, that there are interventions and that we can increase the uptake, which unfortunately is not as high as we would like it to be under the rural development programs. And we are paying quite an attention to the CAP plans in order to encourage the member state to plan interventions in forestry, or at least that there are national funds, like in many member states, like in Finland, for example, where through national funds, they are also supporting the forestry sector. So it's not via the CAP. We have already done a workshop on payment ecosystem services payment schemes at the end of January. Probably some of you took part of it. It was a very lively discussion on how these payment schemes could work to deliver ecosystems in the forestry sector. And we will produce some guidelines following this workshop that could be helpful for exchanging practices and know what are the best experiences going on out there. We are also proposing in the CAP network, and we are already working on that, specific thematic groups on forestry, and this is going to be an important instrument where everybody can bring their knowledge and their expertise. We also want to set up a network of forest dominant rural areas. So that means that the communities that are predominantly forest-based, they can come together and they can share experiences. We think that this can also be a very good asset and a very good opportunity for all this. And of course, very importantly, we are working on the certification of carbon removals together with Trilemma, and the way that the forest will contribute to these certificates that could be sold afterwards in the markets. And therefore, investors can remunerate forest owners for the carbon removal that they obtain. So we are working, this is a quite challenging work, as you may imagine. We have to decide what is the baseline, what is the benchmark, and what is the additionality of the carbon removal. And this is not an easy task, as you may imagine. So what comes in addition to whatever exists already, and what is the price of this carbon removal, and what are the investors willing to pay and remunerate, and if this is compatible with other public support. So these are all elements that we have to combine efficiently and smartly, so this comes as an additional revenue, or at least as another diversification for the forest owner. But most importantly, that the society recognizes the fundamental role of forest in the upcoming targets for the carbon neutrality in Europe. Finally, the monitoring, reporting, and data collection. I will not go into details, but we are already discussing this legislative proposal for a new forest observation, reporting, and data collection that you are also probably following very closely. It's an important piece of work because we lack robust, reliable, and specific data. Sometimes when I hear situation is in forest is very bad, but in some other conferences, I see that the biodiversity in certain forests is improving, that the number of forests in Europe is also increasing. So there is a need to really rely on the data that we have so that we can all come to, well, the same conclusions using the same data. And this is why all this monitoring, using the satellites, using the information that it's in the member states, because let's not forget that this is mainly a national policy and that we have to work under the subsidiarity principle. So we put the framework, and we are really struggling to, well, to push forward all the elements that I just mentioned from the Commission. But of course, this has to be done in partnership with all the stakeholders and the national authorities. So this is the monitoring, but then there are some enabling elements, as you know. So we need a strong research, as I mentioned. We really need to go deep on with the help of the JRC and other institutes, universities, and so on. We need to strengthen the research. We need a new governance, and this is where we are maybe struggling a bit more because, well, we have the Standing Forestry Committee, we have the working group on forestry and nature, we have the civil dialogue group on cork and forestry. There are several working groups that are bringing together expertise and knowledge, but the forest strategy was very clear. We have to rearrange this governance so it delivers a bit better and it delivers on all fronts. So everybody is well represented, from the forest community to also the environmental interest and the stakeholders. So this is what we are trying to, well, to develop right now, and in dialogue, of course, with the member states and the stakeholders. Finally, I will go a bit more on the climate because that was maybe the trade-off, and that will be also the object of the discussion later on. So we have a target to be met. It's supposed to be this 310 million tons for 2035, and this will be based on removals. An important contribution is expected here from the forestry sector. So you have the harvested wood products, but you also have the afforestation, reforestation, the peatlands where many forests are also stored. So these are elements that are very important in order to achieve the target. Forestry is a fundamental sector, and we have to work with it in order to achieve the climate targets. And of course, then the reduction of non-CO2 emissions, which are also counted towards these final targets. A bit digging into this topic more in detail. So as you can see, forest is a big sink for carbon, and therefore we have to, as my colleague predecessor was mentioning, to do a smart combination of reforestation, afforestation, raw materials that are using wood, and how we can all in all bring together this carbon removal target without compromising the economic activity, the socioeconomic benefits, and the vibrant rural areas, which are all very important for the objectives of the strategy. So I will stop here, and thank you very much. I'm really open to questions, but that will be in the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gregorio, for intervention. And of course, you're staying around, so we'll have a chance to debate during the panel discussion. And of course, on behalf of the organizers, once again, thank you so much for joining this event. Now, without any other delay, I would like to move directly to the next speaker. But before this, I would like to invite all the speakers really to focus, because we're falling behind the schedule and our coffee will get cold during the coffee break if we're too late. So please stay very focused in your interventions. And our next speaker will be joining us online, Mrs. Jessica Pouliard. Yes, I see that Jessica is connected. Mrs. Pouliard, she's a Swedish politician of the Moderate Party and has been a member of the European Parliament in the EPP group since 2019. She is in the EPP Vice Coordinator in the Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, as well as a substitute in the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs and in the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. Before becoming member of the Parliament, she was a member of the Swedish Parliament for 13 years. So she has quite a big experience, and the group leader of the Moderate Party. So Jessica, the floor is to you, please.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I have to catch a train, so I will keep this short, and you need to drink coffee, so that may be a good solution. But thank you for inviting me. I think this is a timely debate, that we know that this has a big impact, all these issues on the climate package that we have voted in Strasbourg last week. And like someone mentioned, there was more excitement than we thought maybe when we woke up in the morning. We can see that this package have a lot of consequences for the forestry sector. And I would say from my perspective, that means that policies must reflect the climate contributions of sustainable forestry and acknowledge the multiple functions of the forests. And I know that you know that forests have so many ways of contributing to society. And I think it's important, therefore, that policies must reflect upon that. And I would say that all too often that is not the case. And I think it's a problem in the debate, really, that we talk about forest as carbon sinks and don't see all the ways that forest can contribute to what is important now, like the climate and what we have to do in order to change fossil dependence into more sustainable solutions. And I think it's even more important now, because after what have happened in Europe and the Ukrainian war, I think it's even more important from a geopolitical side and from an economic side to be vocal about the bio-based resources. And I think that we are, some colleagues of mine and I have fought hard to include the multifunctionality of forests into the debate, and also to raise awareness of the sustainable forest management. And we try to get the perspective into the Parliament's position as well. And I think that is maybe not the majority of the Parliament that really have this knowledge and the perspective. So I think it's even more important for me and for you to raise awareness about this. And I could just give you one example, is the new Renewables Directive, where I believe that the new sustainability criteria is introducing a number of unwarranted limitations on the forest sector in the Nordic countries. And I would also like to just mention the LULUCF, and we have worked hard to achieve something that is acceptable, but I think that was also a constant challenge. Because we know that there were strong voices arguing for expanding the carbon sinks, which in the Swedish case risked the scenario in which we would have had to cut down our forestry in large amounts. And I also see that there is a need for stepping up our ambitions across the Green Deal spectrum. I disagree with the idea that steps towards a common EU forestry should be part of that solution. That is the reason why myself and several colleagues reacted so firmly against the Commission strategy last year. In practice, it opens up to much more EU influence over forest and forestry policy. And I think that is really a development that we would like to avoid for so many reasons. And I would just finalize my remarks. That was shorter than I intended, but I think that it's important that we cannot take for granted that the Nordic traditions of active and sustainable forestry will be known by the rest of the world, and not even the rest of Europe. And I think there is why it is so important to have these kind of seminars and to engage in these issues and to be an active part of the debate, because I think we need all the voices that can be heard from the Nordic perspective. I think that is so important for the understanding and for in the end the outcome of the lawmaking. And I would just wish you good luck for the rest of your day, and thank you for inviting me, and I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Puliard, for your very useful intervention, and in particular also for staying focused and to the point. I noted 3 important points from what you mentioned, is that you emphasize the importance of sound knowledge base and policy making, I think, and awareness. So this is, I think, very to the point to the participants and organizers of this event. And of course, I note very well that you emphasize the importance of principle of subsidiarity in the forest policy. And I think this is a known position of some members of the European Parliament, representatives from some of the countries. And then the third, I think, is very important, communication. So communicating with the broader society, communicating with the other stakeholders about what is happening in the forest, about traditions, about multiple roles and possibilities. So thanks so much for your intervention once again, and hopefully you'll not miss your train because of our delays. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we move to our next speaker. We have Tapio Kitola. I think he's joining us here in the room. Yes. Tapio, he is a Councillor of Agriculture, Forestry and Bioeconomy in the permanent representation of Finland to the European Union. it seems that recently Tapio, he's the most busy with forestry related aspects, which is good to hear, I think, for the foresters here. It seems that this is your second term in the permanent representation, so you have quite good experience in Brussels corridors. Before this, or in between your two appointments, it seems that you also had a direct knowledge of being part of the European Commission. So you had an assignment in DG Research, so we were colleagues at a certain point in time. And then you took part in preparations of EU bioeconomy strategy. So this is also very relevant to the debate today. So Tapio, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and many thanks for inviting me to speak here. And I would say it's not a surprise that we Finns, we are always interested about forestry matters. We have 75% coverage of forest in our country. So that's the highest in the European Union. We have 650,000 private forest owners. So some say that every fifth family is in Finland is a forest owner family. So there is a great interest, and also it's economically extremely important. 20% of our export value comes from forestry products. And in Finland, many have summer cottages. I think we have 500,000 summer cottages in Finland, and they are close to forest as well. So people are really, I would say, they have a connection to forest. And we have talked a lot of biodiversity, and Finland is not only making the products for exportation, but we are also protecting our forests. So about the area of Belgium is protected of Finnish forest, 2.9 million hectares. And most of these areas are strictly protected. So we heard Simona and Gregorio and also Jessica. So we heard about many initiatives we have at the moment related to forestry, and I'm not going to tell again the whole list, but there are still many issues. For example, there is definitions are going to be made on old forest and primary forests, and also the closer to nature forests, and that work is in process. And I think that it is not easy, because we know that forests in different parts of Europe, they are very different. So forests in Finland, they are different than forests in Spain or other Mediterranean countries. So and we need to have good definitions. Then I would point out the regulation on deforestation, which is the main aim is to let's say be responsible in the EU, that we are not causing deforestation outside of the European Union. But we can't propose anything for third countries which we are not ourselves following. So it affects also us. And one thing which was not mentioned is sustainable financing and its taxonomy. And there we have already the climate-related delegated act. It is already in force, and then the next one will be the biodiversity-related delegated act, which probably Commission might propose it, make the proposal, publish it in maybe in the end of this year. And then there will be new guidelines for state aid. And already the previous speakers, they talked about many of the initiatives. So it's not a surprise that my work is mainly related now on forestry questions. I think there has never been so many legislative proposals related to forestry in the history of the European Union than we now have. And I think the title of the seminar today, I think it is very good. This trilemma: biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and raw material. And I think key question is how we make sure that the potential of forest can be utilized. And we have to remember these social and economic benefits as well as environmental ones. So we need to have balanced view. And forest products, they are solution to many European and global challenges. We are glad that the Commission is keen to promote wood construction, and we are also in Finland. We are using more wood in construction, and more can be done, and it is good because that is a long-term carbon storage. But we have also, I think the construction material comes from the best parts of the wood, but then there are other parts of the wood which can be used, and we can make or replace plastics, and without having microplastics in our oceans and soils if we use the forest-based products in, for example, in packaging. And then currently, I think 2/3 of textiles are made from oil, and I think there is also a good possibilities to make textiles from wood fibers, and we have a lot of innovation in that sector. And I think we have an opportunity to replace or substitute these oil-based textiles. Not probably all, but I mean there is a good certainly a good possibilities in the market. And then we try to go from diesel or gasoline cars to electric cars, and we need batteries. And again, forestry is a solution there. So one of the companies in Finland, so they are making material for batteries for cars or whatever batteries, and they can substitute the non-renewable graphite. And there are a lot of other innovations. So it's a long list, but I think I think forestry and forest products, I think they are for future and very good for us in Europe and globally. So thank you for inviting me, and I wish the very good continuation for this important seminar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tapio. Among all the important things that you mentioned, to me, a good reminder was the fact that you spoke about sustainable financing. and taxonomy, because I think sometimes as foresters, ecologists, we tend to forget that money is also very important. And it is important either for conservation efforts or development efforts or carbon accumulation in forest efforts. So behind all these efforts, unfortunately, there's money. So if money is not there, then nothing may happen. Also, what is important to hear from you, from experience, to somebody who has very vast experience in Brussels corridors, that you're saying that forest or forestry-related issues keep you awake at night now. You have never seen in your working history here so many forestry initiatives, and I think this is an important signal to all of us. So thanks so much once again, Tapio, for intervention. Now we move to our PROFOR speakers, and we have your pitch presentations, and then I think speaking about this famous concept of elevator pitch, we should realize that our elevator is not in a very tall building now, so you have to be very focused and make it fast. And the first speaker in our list is my old colleague, Knut Oysted. Knut, he is currently Senior Advisor on Forest Policy and International Affairs in the Department of Forest and Climate at Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy Research. Before joining this institute, he worked as Norwegian Counselor of Agriculture and Forest in Brussels, so he also knows Brussels corridors very well, and as the Deputy Director General responsible for forest policy in the Norwegian Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And Knut, what you have not mentioned in this is that when we met, at least when we worked together, you were in charge of Forest Europe process running the Secretariat when Norway was in charge of the Secretariat. So it has always been a pleasure working with you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And the challenge is to be quick. My task here is just to highlight some of the characteristics of the forest and forestry in the Nordic-Baltic region, and I will not be comprehensive, but together with my colleagues, we will be comprehensive in the end. Before we start, I would like to remind ourselves for where we are coming from. We arrived in 100 and a little bit more than 100 years ago with, in Norway, at least degraded forest. And we started some sort of forest awakening and forest policy awakening that has lasted for the time after that. And we are now benefiting from these decisions made and the resources we find in our region. Tapio mentioned that in Finland, 75–74% of the area is forested, and it's a huge part of the area in all our countries. It's the main terrestrial ecosystem, and we live in it and with it. But we are not that many people, so that makes it also very abundant. So we find in our region more than 2 hectares forest per capita, compared to 0.5 or less in the rest of the world. After this, in the last century, we have continuously increased the carbon stocks in living tree biomass, as shown here, at the same time as we have utilized forests for building our societies, building our economy. And this is a picture from a very interesting publication that arrived recently, and I encourage you to have a look at this for the boreal forests. This is very much showcase the combined that we have built the resources and secured the situation we now are in. Norway has actually tripled its standing volume during this period. Forests are privately owned in our region, full stop, basically. But it's also public forest, but you see that the the private-owned forest is dominant for Nordic and Baltic region. This is a very important to keep in mind when we are making forest policies. We are dealing with thousands of people with different objectives and aims for their properties and their forests. And my experience from the past is that when we are doing forest policy, it's extremely important to keep the contact with the landowners and get the understanding of these policies. Anything else will fail. Another way to showcase the importance of forest in the Nordic-Baltic region, this is I'm sorry for the picture at the right, but basically it tells that this forest sector has a significant economic importance in all Nordic-Baltic countries. Norway is a little bit down on the list, but even in our country, this is a very important sector. And already mentioned the 20% of the export income goods of Finland, but I would also like to highlight the forestry employment in Latvia and Estonia, for example. Roundwood production are a little bit up and down, but has increased, and the prospects for the future will also increasing. Currently, these countries listed here cover 1/3 of the EU total. Again, I would like to highlight Finland and Sweden as the main actors in the forestry in the Nordic-Baltic region, and the very important role they play in supplying the market globally, and not least in Europe, which we also will need in the Green Deal and in any transition we are aiming for. Finally, others will talk more about other ecosystem services, but I would like to highlight a characteristic of the Nordic, and that is the availability of the forest for the public. We have, it's accessible for everybody, and this table from this picture from the forest, State of Europe's forest, visualize that basically 99% of the forests are available for public and recreational purposes. A huge, very, very important part of our life in the Nordics and in Baltic countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Knut. And our next speaker now is a member of PROFOR also, Professor Pasi Rautio. He's a plant and environmental ecologist, and he currently works as a research professor in silviculture in Natural Resources Institute in Finland, Luke. In his current work in Luke, he studies forest regeneration and management methods in areas that are facing pressures of other land uses, such as tourism, recreation, and reindeer herding. Professor Rautio, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to tell a few words about the forest structure and how that is linked to the closer to the nature management. Actually, it's a forest dynamics, I could say. Knut already showed this map showing where the green is, and most of that green area is actually in boreal region. And in boreal forests, we mainly, what comes to the tree species, we are quite simple. We mainly have 2 tree species, Norway spruce and Scotch pine, and both of these are either directly or indirectly linked to some kind of a disaster, usually forest fire or storm damages, felling down the trees. What comes there, for example, after forest fire, birches and pines take over, and after a few decades, the spruce starts to take place. It's a shade tolerant, so it looms for decades below the pine and birch, and then finally takes over the forest, even though that would not be an optimal place for the spruce, but it's shade tolerant. So it creates an environment that is impossible for pine and birch to regenerate, and actually finally for spruce as well. So finally to get over this stage, which is of course quite valuable for the biodiversity. As you see, there are a lot of dead wood, which is detrimental for the red-listed species, most of them. So the way out of this is a fire again. So one thing to imitate this is, of course, to burn the forest. And prescribed burning is used to some extent. This is only an experiment that we had. But for example, this is 60-hectare area that the state-owned forest used, visited the last autumn. The problem is that, for example, in this place, they left quite many retention trees and retention tree areas, and many of those burned as well. So it is very hard to control, and you can easily also burn your neighbor's forest if you use forest fire. So the other methods that imitate or try to imitate the closer to nature management is small cap cuttings. Of course, I put a question mark because in nature, the trees are not going anywhere, they just fell down. And here we, of course, collect the trees. So they are less dead wood unless we take care of that. So small cap cuttings here, the dark red areas is the original one, the small cap, and then it's a bit enlarged, and then the orange area are the new ones. So little by little you increase the area. And this is for the light demanding species like pine and birch. For spruces, the selection cutting works better, but it's important that not only the big trees are removed, that is behind the disaster that Knut was saying. 100 years ago, the forests were really bad shape, and the reason was selection cutting, removing only the large trees. So there has to be some more room for the trees to regenerate. So the sick trees and some of the smaller trees as well has to go. Otherwise, it's not going to be a success. And it looks like this from the air. This is a small cap cutting in northern part of Finland. We have created different sizes of caps. The big question, of course, is that what we do in the area between the caps, because we know that it is not regenerated. So there are no seedlings. So we need to do something in between. And one possibility is for example, to use selection cutting like here in northern part of Sweden, where they have done this kind of strips where they are doing selection cutting. So they are removing individual trees. Like said, we can use these methods, but we have to take care that we don't repeat the mistakes that we did 100 or 200 years ago. So we need to do it a bit more smarter way, and a bit more research is needed to really find out the best ways to carry this out. We already know that the economic revenue, what comes to the yield, is not the same. Swedish review revealed that in spruce forest selection cutting yields some like 10–20% less wood than the original or the traditional even age forestry. And in the selection cuttings and in pine forest in northern part of Finland, we know that it takes a lot longer to produce logs. But of course, we have to here remember that the forest might have other values for the forest owner. Mushrooms have been mentioned, hunting, tourism, reindeer herding, aesthetics. So the landscape might be of value for forest owner as well and for the society. So these might compensate the losses that we see if we use the closer to forest management. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Atio. Our next speaker, Vlor Vude, please. Vlor is a forest ecologist at the Estonian University of Life Sciences in Tartu. Her main focus area consists of the individual and combined effects of natural and anthropogenic disturbances on forest succession processes and ecosystem resilience. Floor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introductory words. Sorry. Yeah. Good morning also from my side. The international agreements, aspirations we speak out for, as in the European Green Deal, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I also mention IPBES, Natura 2000. All those commitments lead us to reevaluate current forest management methods and refine the more sustainable approaches in order to safeguard future provisioning of ecosystem services. Forest ecosystems, like ecosystems in general, consist out of a myriad of interactions between species, pollinators and their predators, symbiosis of mycorrhiza, plants and microorganisms, pest species, their hosts and predators, coverage of all parts of the food chain, from producers and consumers to predators and decomposers. It is a delicate system. When something changes, for example, due to human interventions or natural disturbances, then it has an effect on the other parts of the system. But it is not necessarily fragile. Even when an entire species disappears, there are often several other species with similar functions which slide into the free niche. The level of self-organization is actually generally high. The stable, balanced situation may be maintained when processes affecting it keep within the natural range of variation and when species diversity is sufficiently high. The natural range of variation is also often called natural or historical range of variability. And the green ovals in this graph at the left hand show the natural or potential range of variability for ecosystem properties or processes to maintain or restore forest health and ecosystem services. Ecosystems change, they develop, successional, they get disrupted naturally by biotic or abiotic disturbances, but now also increasingly due to human interference, especially management and land use change. When a system is subject to a disturbance event outside its natural range of variation, it may not be able to recover to pre-disturbance structures and functioning without help. It may degrade or turn into a novel ecosystem with less resilience, like in the red ovals. A clear reference for the natural range of variation of a region are hard to provide, but these are gradually put together from studies in areas less affected by humans, added up with now available techniques like carbon dating, tree ring, pollen and stable isotope analysis. What is more difficult to deal with are the legacies of past action, since most forest ecosystems are robust by nature, and usually the wood production function is fully restored, actually. And this has distracted the attention from the other effects of human interference. Fragmentation has gradually impeded species groups to migrate, reproduce, and maintain vital levels of populations. Intensified forest management has removed more viable habitats than before. Old and mature trees, other age classes, now also brushwood for pellets, for the wood pellets industry, deadwood, forest, understory, and even tree roots. Reaction to past and current management is only visible in population dynamics with a short or longer delay, making it harder to detect causal relations and to timely halt devastating activities. Thus, the highly forested Nordic and Baltic forests, our starting point for tomorrow's forestry, are actually a reflection of the commercially selected species, plus those that were able to cope with past and current management. Another confounding factor consists in the effects of cascading events, often incited or magnified by climate change. Like here in southern Estonia, where after a summer storm in 2016, we studied the epidemic outbreaks of European spruce bark beetle. The spread of the outbreak seems highly influenced by the extremely dry summer of 2018 and also subsequent summers. Therefore, we are now also including areas that were not affected by the storm, but have a lot of spruce bark beetle outbreaks likely connected to these extreme weather extremes. This European-wide climate-related increase in disturbance impact may cause landscapes to moderately shift with some changes in species composition, or to shift to an entirely different biome. Where we tended to homogenize forest management in the past for efficiency reasons, it may be more diversified to increase adaptive capacity and resilience. One way to achieve that is to adhere to the natural range of variation under the natural disturbance-based management. That has a lot of closer to nature management elements in it, like Pasi was talking about in the former pitch. It does not mean that we need to say goodbye to clear felling or retention forestry. A management system should actually be more according to the natural range of variation in each specific forest type. If we would apply disturbance-based management for fire, we can refer to the ASIO model, which is a fire frequency model. It's an acronym for absent, seldom, infrequent, or often, occasional fire frequency. The share of clear cutting allowed in the left hand, the old version of this model, would be much higher, about 70%, than in the revised model. So the share of old forests in this new model would be higher. And with that, and with some other revisions, the different dynamics models would each cover about 1/3 in the management. I would like to end with a note on the consequences of a change in the course of forest management to more attention for biodiversity and natural processes. With that, we increase flexibility and adaptability. If the economic aspects prevail, the short-term benefits may fade in the light of long-term risks. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Flor. Our next speakers will be Daiga and Lars, who will be speaking during the coffee break. So this puts a lot of pressure on you because now officially we started our time of a coffee break. So our next speaker is Daiga Zute. She is from Latvian State Forest Research Institute, Silava, where she's a researcher. In her work, she's studying forestry, forest carbon, and LULUCF related issues old growth forest climate change mitigation measures. So look forward to your very interesting presentation, Daiga. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, dear colleagues. Now let's focus on forest and carbon. So today expectations from forest sector are really high. Thus, we need a better understanding where forest sector, forest carbon potential is hidden in order not to collide with other forest sector roles and to really benefit for the climate. Different biomes hold different potential for carbon. Here you see global picture visualization of forests with major falls in living biomass and in soil. However, we have very different forest types, and each of those biomes has very specific carbon potential, and also boreal forest holds its very specific carbon potential. This we'll talk about today. So if we talk about carbon, what we can actually do and what are our specific limits. So there are those aspects we can influence and those we are out of our hands. So some factors are very hard or even impossible to impact, as legacies of forest management and the current forest age structure, and to some extent also natural disturbances. But what we actually can do, so in this aspect, forest science can definitely help us. And there I wanted to say, have you ever imagined that we plant trees, trees for future climate conditions? And if we plant a pine today, this tree will experience climate conditions those from 2100 and even further. So adaptation is very important. If that pine tree will be not good adapted, it will slow grow not so well and will be exposed to natural disturbances, and that means, of course, also carbon loss. So in this respect, forest science is very important, and by means of tree breeding, we can improve resilience, and also we can get more carbon. And actually, since I am from Latvia, I can share experience from my country. The result of forest science, our pine stands already grow faster. We see even 15% of increment, and why it is important in terms of carbon, it means also that more carbon is stored. So we can say it's the same forest area, but different quality, different vitality that translates in more carbon. So also forest management, of course, can contribute a lot. And we see the role of forest owners in the Green Deal is prominent, since motivated, supported forest owners can hugely contribute. And how is that? It is important that productive forest stands, of course, means more carbon, and vice versa. Unproductive, poorly managed stands means loss of carbon, means less of carbon. Harvested wood products store carbon all its lifetime, and we all generally acknowledge the role of long-lived wood products. But with this slide, I just wanted to emphasize a linkage from harvested wood products. And have you thought about where does long-lived products come from? I'm sure you know that, but to emphasize, to gain high quality timber, somebody has to grow it and somebody has to manage it. So, and timber from unproductive damaged stands will not be useful for solid wood products. So when we have productive forest stand, we will have more quality, more solid wood. If we have unproductive, low quality wood, the result will be in less possibility to have chairs, tables, etc., and that will translate in more energy wood, in more biofuel. So it is important link just to again remind you where from does long-lived wood products come from. Then another important point for carbon on the system boundaries. When we want to know how much carbon do we have, we count all those small carbon pools together, and then we put it in one or another model. Here you see an example of very different models from Europe on land sector, and maybe you wonder why the result is so different, whether there's something wrong about one or other model. The answer is in the details. So you have to be careful, and when you analyze different models, and these are very famous ones, including Faustat and Efficient, very well-known models. So the answer is you have to be careful what is included in the system boundaries and what is not. For example, is soil pool included? Is harvested wood pool included? Is fossil resource substitution effect included? And it's matter. So all the models are valid as the differences in the system boundaries. And it is important to understand how for a sector carbon is in what system boundaries is approached. So we look only on forest management, the sector, or also in bigger picture, what are our system boundaries? It matters. So the total forest ecosystem carbon is built from a number of smaller trees, and it includes not only tree carbon, but also soil. And additionally, we gain also from carbon storage in harvested wood products and substitution of fossil resources. And here you see one example from Finland, where you see how much carbon potential has not only living trees, but also harvested wood products. And also in the green blue color, you see the effect of substitution, which is really important. And in this picture, another linkage I wanted to underline is about consumption. We all buy something, chairs, tables, etc., etc. And just imagine when you go to the store, if there is you want to buy a wooden chair. If there is no wooden chair, you would choose another alternative. And in the context of carbon, what that alternative would be, it would be, let's say, plastic tree. So just to be aware that if there's less wood material, wood products, the product demand will be sustained anyway, but unfortunately likely from more carbon intensive fossil materials. And this is very important to underline. So our message is that in this context, substitution effect is underestimated also in the new EU forest strategy. So the substitution effect is very important, and we have to acknowledge that as well. One size doesn't fit all, and there is a short but clear message from forest owners. I like this very much, and this is forests are diverse, forest owners are diverse, and also forest management practices are diverse. We cannot agree more on that. So, but it works also in climate context when we talk about different approaches to maximize carbon and contribute to climate mitigation targets. So we find there both approaches. We can store carbon in living trees, for example, in longer rotation period and maximize carbon storage, but we can also enhance CO2 sequestration by quicker forest growing cycles with maximizing CO2 sequestration. So it depends on forest type, on conditions, etc., etc. So we have this different range of possibilities. Then when we talk about forest carbon, we can work with different strategies, and the most popular for carbon, of course, is afforestation. Everybody knows afforestation is a very good approach to store carbon. But as also previous speakers emphasized, in EU, not all countries are the same. And for example, in Nordic countries, since we are already forest area is around 70%, the potential of forestation is not so huge. So in other countries, that would be a very promising measure, but not the potential to implement this measure is not equal. So in our region, in Nordic and Baltic countries, we more focus on existing forest areas, and we focus on carbon stock increased within existing areas. And we can do a lot as well in this direction. And then the third approach is to increase use of wood and to contribute with harvested wood products and substitution effect of fossil resources. And this is very universal. Everybody can do that. So to conclude with few main messages, so healthy, productive forest means more carbon, of course, and contrary, and vice versa. Management failures leads to slow carbon accumulation and low quality wood, read energy wood, biofuel. One size doesn't fit all in European forestry, of course, and we want to underline that we need private owners as a partners for the Green Deal or carbon. So the climate benefits we gain from active sustainable forest management, forest products, and the substitution effect are essential for us for both achieving necessary fossil emission reduction and promoting EU biodiversity. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daiga. And last, but of course not the least, Lars Hogborn from Skogforsk. Lars is currently working as a soil scientist, as a senior researcher at Skogforsk, and also at the same time he's the associated professor at SLU, which is Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. His main research focus is environmental effects on forestry on issues related to soil and water quality, including nutrient and carbon cycling. In addition, he's also working with knowledge exchange to the operational forestry concerning water and soil protection. So please, Lars, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully I can be brief because you're all longing for coffee now. So I'm trying to summarize this now and starting to show some of the pictures from the Swedish forestry. I mean, we are talking a huge area. This is the lush green broadleaf species in the south to less productive, nutrient poor forests in the north. So, I mean, we have all these variants in forest stand quality and production capacity and so on. And also, we have this spatial scale. I mean, this is spruce needle, and you can measure everything on that. I mean, you can measure all the soil, the water quality in the droplet, and what's happening in the needles, and even the spider threads. You can actually make that at a laboratory. But what will happen with all these data when you come up to the relevant scale? I mean, the landscape scale, where you have the forest, you have the water, you have agriculture, you have the scenic beauty of the landscape. So how do we go from that precision to this more relevant scale? And another scale is time. I mean, already touched upon this, and trees are long-lived creatures, and this is actually the oldest tree in Sweden. It's 1,000 years old. And normally we run forestry for 60 to 100 years in the north. But still 100 years is quite a lifespan as well. So it's a lot of things can happen. So you need to, not only the spatial scale, but also the temporal scale is important when we're doing forestry, or think about forestry, and legislation about forestry. And I think the key word is one size doesn't fit all, which I think is the take-home wordings from this meeting. And we have the deadwood, and the deadwood is alive. as well. So, I mean, it's important that we leave things behind when we do forestry, but we can't leave too much because then we might start a fire. So it's a balance as well. This is a rather typical Swedish forest landscape, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I think. It's a mixture of different tree species, stand ages, and species, and water, and so on. And this is forest restoration, 1890 style. This is the second generation of spruce forest on the former Kaluna heathland. And please remember, this is man-made ecosystem as well, because it's used for sheep grazing, and it was burned every 10 years just to keep the Kaluna fresh enough for the sheep to graze on. So I mean, we can maximize carbon storage in the forest. That's no problem. Just use the right species on the right site and make sure that we have high enough nitrogen deposition or fertilizers or whatever, and a sufficient amount of water, and come up with something like this, which is, I mean, from a forest production eye, it's beautiful, but from other eyes, it's just dull. So that's another thing. I mean, you have to have the different perspective and to acknowledge that different people have different perspective of things, of course. But also what happened to all the other services we've been talking about. I mean, we have these non-woody products from forestry. People like to hunt, and pick berries, and pick mushrooms. And during the pandemic years here, where, I mean, we realized that people need a forest just to get out from the house. So that's another important measure. And as Pasi pointed out, I mean, we have different forest management systems, and there are some still on the drawing board, but most of the forest nowadays is done by even-aged forestry. So it's final felling, planting, cleaning, thinning, and then final felling again after 60 to 100 years. And the age depends on site quality and climate and so on. And this forest to the right, I actually planted that forest way back in 1975. So trees are growing, and so are the planters. But we also have other aspects on. I mean, water protection is important. We have lots of water in Northern Europe, but when you come down to Central Europe, Southern Europe, I mean, fresh water is a scarcity, and usually when we do logging operations, we take a lot of precautions to save on water, to protect the water, protect the soil. And if you're interested, just made a film called Traceless. It's available on YouTube, how to fell without disturbing the waters. And that film actually had a silver medal at can't remember it now, but it was a film festival in France. So it's about eco-friendly management. So by the end of the day, we would like to avoid that kind of science out in the forest and in the landscape. And also going back to the mention of payment for ecosystem schemes, there are a lot of payment schemes out in Europe where you can plant trees and woodlands to protect the waters. So trees are important. Just to sum up here, some environmental considerations during final felling. We were supposed to leave so-called eternity trees, trees that will stand until they blow down, basically, just to have it and carry on the legacy of what's happened. And also save on important broadleaf species, especially salix, because they are important for the insects and pollen producers. And no soil damages, and protect ground and surface waters, of course. And also protect all the dead wood. Because as said previously, I mean, the forestry we are doing today carries a legacy of use and misuse over millennia, more or less. We have a history here, so I don't have time to go into. It'll probably take a few days, but. So, some conclusion. Should I stay or should I go? Or what will be the best way forward? Of course, knowledge-based solution is important, but I would like to stress the importance of scale, that we're thinking in different scale at the same time. And also a lot of cross-subject cooperations. I mean, to have scientists talk to each other and not sit in different parts of the ivory tower and make up ideas. And also be clear, I mean, we have conflicts, and not only potential conflicts, there are real conflicts in how we see things and how we use things. And we also need to improve the communication and knowledge transfer between researchers, NGOs, forestry, forest owners, forest machine operators, and society in general. So I think that is very important, that we have an open mind. So, time for coffee.
Thank you so much, Lars. Very good. We are behind the schedule, so I suggest that we take not more than 15 minutes, maybe of the coffee break maximum. So we would meet here 11:10. So the same for the online participants. We meet 11:10. Enjoy your coffee. Thanks. you. Everybody seems to be back to the room, and hopefully our online participants also had a very good coffee break. Now we continue with the panel discussion. Maybe before I go to the questions, which I've noted, I would like to introduce two members of the panel which have not spoken today yet. So first participant is Fanny Pomlong. She is the Secretary General of Confederation of European Forest Owners, CPF, as many of you know. CPF is the umbrella organization of national forest owners organizations here in Brussels. She joined CPF in 2018, and prior to this, she worked for 5 years as a policy director in the European Association representing EU bioenergy sector. So she's quite aware of today's discussion on climate change and bioenergy, I'm sure. From 2009 to 2012, she worked in the European Commission. So in fact, we were colleagues. She was in DG Energy, so that proves your expertise in energy, as policy officer from 2006 to 2009. Looking back from 2006 to 2009, she was deputy director of French Forest Cooperatives Association. So a very long experience. And our next member of the panel, third member of the panel, is Hanna Leiponen-Siraki. Hanna, she is director of Brussels office of Central Union of Agricultural Producers and Forest Owners. Hanna is in Brussels since, maybe you say this yourself because I don't have it in my notes. 2005, so also a long time, very experienced in Brussels corridors. And her organization is representing 200,000 forest owners, members from Finland. She holds master's degree in agriculture and forestry from Helsinki University, so of course expert in forestry as every second Finn probably. She has previously worked on EU policy questions in the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry and as a private consultant. So thank you very much for three members of the panel joining this panel discussion today. And Gregorio, you have already spoken, and I have noted a question that I would like to address to you. And I need to find my notes because I had lost my comfortable seat at the table. I've been put in this uncomfortable position here on the podium. So Gregorio, in your opinion, now we all discussed about this balance. So multifunctional forest management is about setting the balance, and then this balance has to be strike at different time scales, different perspectives. Now, from your point of view, since sustainable forest management is a moving target, so at this point in time, what needs to be done in forestry now in order to reach the target of setting the balance? So, because when you always try to set the balance between different factors, some factors exceed the zero, the ground level, and some are below. So, in your personal opinion, of as deputy head of unit in DG Agri in charge of forestry, where are we now? How do we rebalance the system? Please, Gregorio.
Thank you very much for this question, and yeah, indeed, this is a bit the objective of today's panel discussion. So, I mean, it would be very useful to also learn from actually the experts, the people in the ground, the practitioners, and the ones that are also involved in how the policy is being developed. In our view in DG Agri, that's precisely what we are more concerned about, and this is the core business of what we're doing is just trying to strike the right balance between the three dimensions of the sustainability. Well, just as a side comment, you know that we in Agri we have reorganized ourselves. We are all working on the same directorate, which has three units: the economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and the social sustainability units. So this gives you already an idea on the importance that we give to the three dimensions, working together and then under the same directorate. This was not the case before in DG Agri, and this also allows us to have a bit all the different perspectives. So this is the role that DG Agri is trying to ensure. Since already in 1990, since, if I'm not mistaken, the first EU forest strategy where DG Agri was the sole responsible. But now times change, there are new societal expectations, there are new political priorities. There is well, a completely different landscape in terms of politics, in terms of society, in terms of environment also. So we have to adapt ourselves. And of course, I will not hide that the environmental agenda has definitely increased importance because we are living in the middle of probably the most important crisis that we have experienced ever, which is the environmental and the climate crisis. So we have to react. It's not just that we put in paper something to keep everything working as it's, well, it has used to be in the past. So to change things so nothing changes, this is not where we cannot afford that anymore. So we really need to, well, to deliver on several fronts related to environment and climate. And of course, the forestry is one of these sectors that it's been also targeted, and that the contribution can be well, more important. So in our views, indeed, there are different ways to approach it. So first of all, we need to have sustainable management of forests. This has to be a long-term perspective for the forest owners, that they can make a living out of this, that they can stay with a forest that is managed according to several principles, which are all very clearly laid down in several guidelines, in the pan-European guidelines. This is very clear from several documents, reflection, and international agreements. We are stepping up also the ambition on the deforestation agenda. So there are on labeling. So there are many things that already provides a framework for the forest stakeholders to develop the activity in a sustainable way, but at the same time to manage the activity. So we have also to strike the balance between the restoration of the habitats. That means that nature is back, but this has to live together with the management of the nature, because otherwise, and I'm from the south of Europe, we know very well what happens when the forest is not correctly managed. And we know very well every summer what is happening because we don't invest, because we don't manage the way it's supposed to be. And this is far worse in terms of climate impact than any other possible restoration without accompanying management of the land. So this is for us a very important balance that we have to strike in terms of economic development and of the forest, but also, of course, I mean, the Green Deal and the guidelines for afforestation and reforestation. We need to see what type of species are more adapted. We are struggling now with the planting of certain alien species in some member states that, according to, well, to some people in the Commission, shouldn't be allowed, but we have to come up with scientific evidence. So thanks again to all these research and the data and the monitoring that you are providing, because this allows us to actually decide whether or not certain species are more adapted. They are more prone to forest fires or not. They serve also the purpose of biodiversity, or on the contrary, they are not that suited for that objective. So that's a bit what we have to do in the coming future. And also, I mean, I just was reading the latest discussions on forest related to the carbon sequestration and the certification of carbon removal. And of course, we have to decide what is the impact of certain practices in the forest sector. What is the impact of certain afforestation practices? How much carbon they are supposed to remove from the atmosphere? What is the impact of agroforestry? What is the impact of a forest management plan? What is the impact of all this? Because this will have to be quantified. And I'm not talking about the medium term. This has to come by the end of this year. So the need is really pressing. The agenda is very charged, but our objective is that the three dimensions, they work all together. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gregorio. If I may contribute from my personal experience, I was telling Gregorio over the coffee break in 2004, 2008, when I worked on forestry, striking the balance started from having a beer with my colleagues from DG Environment, DG Enterprise, and the wild geese. I think this was the core for the discussions and deciding on everything and balancing out all the priorities. So I think dialogue is very important. Thanks, Gregorio. Now, Fanny Pom, I have a dual question to you. So first part of the question is, what is the role of private forest owners in reaching the goals of the European Green Deal? And then the second part of this question is how to motivate or maybe incentivize even European forest owners and foresters to reach these goals. Please, Fanny Pom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for the very interesting first part. I took a lot of notes, and I found it very enlightening. I will try to answer to the two parts of your question with a few comments to leave space to discussion afterwards. First of all, before starting, I would like to say that European forest owners support the Green Deal ambitions, they support the Green Deal objectives. This is a very important statement before starting. Where we have some concerns as questions is about the way to reach these objectives, but generally speaking, of course, we support the Green Deal. About the role of forest owners, the reason why forest owners support the Green Deal is that because they think they have an important role to play to reach these objectives. And I would like to mention three objectives. The climate neutrality, one, which can be reached via forest, via the 3S functions of the forest, the sequestration, the storage, and the substitution. And it was rightly reminded that this is a balance to find between these three functions. We have the feeling that right now the discussion is really focused on the sink, which is of course an important part of this equation, but substitution also has to be addressed. So they play a role to achieve the carbon neutrality via active and sustainable management. They also play a role in preserving Europe's natural capital, which is one of the Green Deal objectives. Because contrary to what we sometimes can read or hear, biodiversity is definitely encompassed within sustainable forest management. And European forest owners would shoot in their own foot if they would not consider biodiversity, because they want to keep their forests healthy and resilient and transmit it to future generations. So that's the second. And the third objective of the Green Deal is what is called the transformation of rural areas. Of course, the forest sector contributes to this objective because it's one of the pillars of reaching what they call this rural area livelihood, these vibrant rural areas, as we call it in the policy making. So that's the role of the forest owners. About their motivation, how to motivate the forest owners to achieve this role, I would like to share 4 ideas with you. The first is that their skills and expertise should be recognized and properly considered. They are people behind the forest, as I like to say. The sustainable forest management, the maintenance of healthy forest does not happen by itself. These expertise need to be recognized. And we feel that over the latest months in the EU policy making, there is a kind of lack of this knowledge and expertise. And this expertise needs to be accompanied because, as I usually say, I say it very often, the only certainty that forest owners have today is the uncertainty of what will happen in their forests. So they need to get more knowledge, more skills to adapt the management of their forests to make them fit for future conditions. The second factor or message from my side is we should not aim at a one-size-fits-all type of management. And I think it was rightly and several times mentioned in the earlier presentation, so I will not insist on that, but that's a key message to keep the motivation of forest owners, recognize the diversity. Third, we need an evidence-based and scientifically funded discussion to make the right policy decisions. And here I allow myself to comment one statement that was made in the opening by Simonas, that European forests are in bad state. And it's in the also action, this is even true for the boreal forest. I just would like to question, are we talking about the condition of forest? Are we talking about the conservation statutes, conditions? So are we talking about the MAES report? Are we talking about the state of nature report? So when we come with this kind of statement, forests are in bad shape, we have to know what we are talking about, because 50% of EU forests are in good conditions. So evidence-based and fact-based discussion. Last but not least, and it was also rightly mentioned, we need to develop schemes to give a value to the other services that forests provide. Not only wood provision, of course, wood provision remains important and will be important, but all these other services, the carbon, the biodiversity. So how to develop this payment for ecosystem services, we were just discussing during the coffee break. We are looking forward for this guidance from the Commission, which is announced in the forest strategy. We think that these services, these schemes have to be locally adapted. They have to be voluntary and ideally market-based. And we are really interested to see the further developments. So I have more, but I hope I can come back on other statements that were made during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fanny Pom. The next question goes to Han, and it's a simple question, but probably the answer will be very complex. What is the role of forestry in moving towards a fossil-free society? Han, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be part of the panel here. I'm very honored, and actually, I also have to say that I'm very inspired by the previous speakers, all of you. So thanks to you. Now, I think we have touched upon all the important forestry topics today, and that's quite a challenge to look at from the different angles. And I think you've provided an excellent seminar content already now, and I think it will still evolve. But I am looking at the forestry sector from the lobbyist point of view, lobbying for the Finnish forest owners. And that's not trying to say that I'm an expert in forestry, although I'm a forest owner back in Finland. So I'm basing my opinions or what I say also on that. But to go to my topic or to the question, so what's the role of forests towards the fossil-free society? Like you said, there are really big expectations and really big plans for the forestry sector at the moment in the European Union. Forests, we know that forests are providing multiple benefits, like Fanny Pom told, including energy and products replacing fossil materials. We have heard about it already today. But and then definitely we know with the global political and the war in the situation and the war in Europe that we definitely need the forestry sector to provide us different things for the fossil-free society. And then I'm concentrating now on a policy process that is going on. It's the Renewable Energy Directive. EU has a very ambitious goals. There are increasing targets for renewable energy from their Renewable Energy Directive. And also in the Repower EU plan, action plan, there is increased targets for renewable energy. And in order to fulfill these objectives, they are actually very, very ambitious. So we need bioenergy. We just received a few weeks ago the decision from the European Parliament Committee of Environment, which states that the forest energy as a primary biomass would no longer be considered as renewable energy source. And that was quite a big negative news at least to us in Finland. It would mean a big amount, 20 terawatt hours of energy kind of going from the renewable to fossil energy category. And as if the wood chips would no longer be considered renewable, that's actually is the same amount as the 2 of our nuclear plants produce energy. So it's a huge amount of energy. And then Finland has a national decision to become climate neutral by 2035 already. And then if this stands in the parliament and also later in the process, this being zero emitter by 2035 in Finland, it's not possible, at least makes it much more harder target to achieve. And then as a forest owner and from the representing forest owners, I feel like that these kind of decisions that we hear or the discussions even, they are a bit out of reality at the moment. And also, I think when we talk about the renewable energy and acid used now from the forestry sector. We have a share of wood-based energy in Finland, it's nearly 30%. And at the moment, when we calculate the side streams and waste wood also from the industry and then the primary biomass, about 1/2 of Finland's wood streams end up as energy. But we can still create that sustainably. And that's the message I want to bring today. So it's not a good solution just to say that you cannot use something when we really need it in the EU level when we talk about our energy policy. And then since we know that it can be made sustainably. And then the second point, maybe here we can go to other topics maybe later. But the second point is that really the sustainable forest management, like Fanny Palm also said, that we feel like that we can provide both the economic, social, and the environmental benefits at the same time. And I think we have a very much wisdom in this room by the scientists who can kind of more exactly tell how it can be done. And I'm not saying that the Finnish forest owners don't want to improve. That's not the case. We want to improve. We have improved. I think that shows in the statistics too. But you have to have tools and opportunities for the economic growth also in our forestry sector.
Thank you, Hanna, for promoting continuous improvement. I think we're all in favor of this. Now I would like to revert to Ellen. Do we have any questions from our participants online that you would like to pose to the panel members? No. Okay. I think the only question that we had in the past was whether presentations will be shared, and this is an announcement also to participants here that the organizers will share presentations to all those who have registered for the event in the coming days. So thank you so much. Since we don't have any questions from participants online, I would like to revert now to the audience. And please, I'm sure you have many questions and you would like to provoke the discussion, or discussion has been provoked. Somebody would like to come up with counter arguments. Please, anybody. Who is the first, please? Do we have a microphone? Yeah, yes. And please introduce yourself when you're asked the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Amila Meshkin. I am the policy advisor at the European State Forest Association. I have a question for Hanna on the topic of bioenergy, what you just mentioned. It comes to my mind now. So policymakers have decided here that primary biomass will not get subsidies and it's not going to be counted as renewable, right? But then in reality, what will this mean? It's going to be higher prices for this type of bioenergy, and then, okay, if there is other source, because I'm not sure if there was mentioned that other sources have been secured of energy. So it's going to be higher prices for this type of energy, if I'm not wrong, if the subsidies are not included. And even if it's not going to be used for bioenergy, this type of primary biomass usually is only suitable for being used as bioenergy. And management is not end-use driven. So management happens whether end use is approved, so to say, or not. So there will be this primary biomass that should or could only be used for bioenergy. So what's going to happen in the field? How this problem will be solved? How do you see it? I mean, thank you.
Thanks. I think it's a very good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but first of all, yeah, like you exactly as you said, that this forest biomass, as all the experts in the room know, that it's not grown for energy as such, energy purposes, but it's kind of a side products from the thinnings and when we are trying to produce the long-lived wood material at the end of the cycle. And so, of course, from the forest owner point of view, of course, I would like to get the best value for my products, whatever I'm producing from my forest. And therefore, the question of price is a good one. But what I'm worried about there is that, like I said, that if it's considered non-sustainable, or that what is kind of the attitude change in the discussion, also what happens next, what next wood product is not considered as non-sustainable, And I think that's a slippery slope. I think there are better experts to give a kind of a numbers and figures to that answer what happens to the price. But this is my point of view. Thank you.
Steini Pom, I think you would like to contribute? No?
Yes, just to add to the answer of Hannah, I would like to have a very quick example. Well, first of all, a comment. The question also, to complete your question, Amila, would be what would also be the consequence on the secondary biomass? Because if the primary biomass is not suitable for reaching the renewable energy target, will member states continue to support it and rely on it, and maybe would rely more on the secondary biomass? So what could be the kind of impact on these two types of biomass? It's a bit unknown, at least unclear in my views. The second comment I wanted to make, really in relation to what Hannah has just said, is the consequences for the forest management. I am French, and in France we have 3.5 million forest owners. 2 million have less than 1 hectare. And in France, they are really struggling to make these small size holdings being managed. And I have seen examples in my previous professional life where wood energy was really like the kind of factor that was a starting point to manage the forest, because it could finance some management operations which have a cost, and which small size forest owners would not have done, because it is a cost and not a revenue. And because these operations now could be financed via energy, it was a kind of entry, put the foot into the entry door to start managing the forest. And I saw this concrete example. So if this is now, if we are going backward, what could be the impact on the forest management? To me, it's a big question mark.
Yes.
Thank you.
We used to call this wood mobilization, I think, no? Some years ago, that was a big issue discussed. Lars,
Exactly.
you would like to contribute?
Right. I would like to comment on this biofuel thing. I mean, first of all, we need to clarify what we are talking about. I mean, we have this primary bioenergy, twigs, branches, dead wood directly from the forest, and we have these secondary energy sources from the industry. That's so dust, chips, and you name it, and bark, of course. That's 10% of the tree is bark. And if you focus on the primary sources, if we leave twigs and branches in the forest, they will decompose within 10 years, and all the carbon will be released anyhow. So if you have a sustainable forestry, the amount of carbon dioxide from decomposing wood will be more or less constant. So it doesn't matter if we burn it instantly or if we do it over a period of time of 10 years. So I can't get my head around this question, why it's a question.
It's a good question. Maybe Pasi, as ecologist, no? Do you have an answer to this? Would you like to contribute?
Yeah, well, I agree. It is a question that has been bugging me as well. At the moment, actually, for example, in Finland, the more remote the area is, the less there is a market for this kind of a material. So even the thinnings that leave quite large trunks in the forest, there are no markets for that. So it's not burned because there are nobody who's buying that. So if we decide to use that as a material, and I think we have to replace the Russian ships, for example, or the peat that we have to get rid of, it's like Lars said, it won't have a large effect on the long-term carbon sinks or sources.
But I think it's a very good point that you brought up. What has happened in the context of the war, Russian aggression against Ukraine, and the follow-up consequences of trade ban with Belarus and Russia. And I would like to ask a counter question to you. Now, are you sure that this is only sort of a short-term consequence? Because, and the solution, I was discussing during the break with Diana. She said, for example, in Lithuania, there's a shortage of wood pallets. So you cannot buy it. You cannot buy it. Nobody's selling it because everybody's increasing prices, is expecting prices to continue going up until the autumn. And you're saying, Diana, that the companies they stopped selling until the autumn. I've read also that the firewood the price has tripled or quadrupled over the last months. Now, I understand in Finland probably you have very big difficulties as well because you had many heating power plants which were being fed with chips, and we have the same issue in Lithuania, where chips were brought from Belarus. Now, what will be the solution to this? You seem to imply that there's underutilization maybe of certain types of wood in remote areas in Finland, but will this be a case for a long time? Maybe this is set to change in the future, because there seems to be a shortage of wood, at least in our region currently.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we first of all we have to replace the wood chips from Russia. For example, in eastern part of Finland, in some facilities, 40% of the ships are Russian ships. So we have to replace that one, which means that there is going to be more market in this small wood that we at the moment leave in the forest. So there is going to be a better price for that, I think so. And I foresee that might be a permanent change, because if the price is right, why should we brought that from Russia? The other thing is that we are bringing quite much birch for plywood, for example, from Russia, and that we can't replace from Finnish sources. So that is going to be a problem. Where do we buy it from? And maybe it's the other parts of Europe, which means that the prices will go higher and higher in that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions on different topics, perhaps? Would like to switch? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Galen Carina Christiansen from North Sweden European Office. I'm so happy to hear about all the topic of that the forests in the Union are actually owned by people. And in Sweden and Finland, there's almost 1 million of forest owners. That's a major group of people. And reading all the documents, which I've done in a short while, like the strategies and all of that, I've noticed that the union in those documents and strategies, they always say EU's forests, not the forests in EU. So, and I wonder how would we maybe change that wording in the future?
Thank you. Who would like to reply? Maybe from the panelists.
That's a very good, very relevant comment. I really usually insist on there are people behind forest, and when I say that, I usually say in these EU policies we usually read forests should do this and we need forests to achieve that, and we never talk about the ones who are doing the actions and who actually are also endorsing the responsibility if something is wrong. So what can we do to change it? I think well, from our perspective, what we did, for example, is this Welcome to My Forest initiative, where we presented these short videos of forest owners explaining who they are and what their forest means to them. We need to explain again and again that a forest does not remain healthy by itself. I also reiterate the motto, and I would like to thank Daiga for reminding that the forests are diverse, the forest owners are diverse, and the forest management practices are diverse. And if you don't consider the cultural background, the social backgrounds, the values of each and every forest owner, you cannot understand the management which is undertaken. So it's the diversity not only on the forest practices, but on the forest owners and on the forest. And if you combine all these diversities, you may understand what's going on in the forest. So what can we do? I should say that from our perspective here in Brussels, keep explaining again and again, and always when I speak in public, starting with there are people behind the forest. But if you have better ideas or suggestions to help us with that, I'm very open. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny Pum. I think Gregorio would like to, and then Hannah.
Okay. Well, no, just to point out to the existing work and the future work on the CAP network and each of the national rural networks that are operating in each of the member states. So I would invite the stakeholders to pay attention to this, to get involved in the work of the national rural networks, and to at the end to show the faces behind the forest, no? And the people that is working and they're managing and living out of the forest or enjoying the forest. So there are many faces, no, that are in the forest, but the National Rural Network, and we are doing a lot of work now with the contractor, the contact point that will manage the European network for the CAP in the future, to have this specific focus on forestry, because this is also stemming from the EU forest strategy. And well, this of course now overarching network that will encompass the first pillar, including eco schemes, and also the second pillar, of course, more traditionally supporting forestry and so on. I think that there could be a good potential there to make the forestry a bit more visible in the societies and in the rural areas. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick comment. Thank you very much for reminding this, that we should talk about the forests in EU and the number of forest owners only in Finland and Sweden. But I have written down here in my notes that actually it's the forest owner who decides what's happening in his or her forests. Of course, following legislation and the national and EU also, but it's actually his or her decision, and it's important to have the different opportunities for him to how to use his forest to decide. And that's one important thing, and we have to remember that it also includes the property rights. They should be respected when we regulate the forests. And then one thing I would like to raise here also as an example that actually forest owners do want to do good in their forests. So in Finland, we have plenty of experience about the voluntary conservation programs. And then they are hugely popular. Actually, the money that state puts into those programs is not enough. So there is more demand than a demand for these, or forest owners are offering their forest to be conservated, than there is money for that to compensate for that. And I think that's a good example. And we should remember here in Brussels too, when we discuss about the forest, that voluntary systems are an option, not only the kind of targets we also should follow dearly. So that's the important thing. And maybe the third point here, which we have touched, is still going back to my original subject. Actually, it's about that how forests can replace fossils, and we have talked about long-lived products a lot here today, and this is extremely important. But we should also talk about the circular bioeconomy, and we have to remember that wood is a material that can reused and circulated, and also that legislation regarding that should be in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So one last chance for the last question, if anybody has, because we have a very important speaker waiting for us online for his last intervention. So anybody from the room? Last chance? 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I turn back to the panel. Panelists, the last chance for your intervention. Please,
Sorry,
Fanico.
I'm going to ask a question to myself, but just one comment, because I didn't mention it, and I think it's very important. Because in the policy brief, the concept of SFM, which is in transition, we heard in the previous presentations how the concept of SFM should evolve and develop. I would like to insist on the fact that SFM has been implemented for decades, and it has kept evolving all the time. So supporting sustainable forest management definition, principles, and indicators, which are currently defined, doesn't mean that we are stuck and that we are set in stone, we are static, and we don't want to evolve. On the contrary, supporting SFM as defined today means that, at least from the forest owner's perspective, we will continue to adapt, to learn, to be flexible. And we had very good examples on how this flexibility should be implemented. So to me, it's a very important message to say we do not throw the baby with the bathwater, but just say, okay, it doesn't mean when we say we support SFM and we need to endorse SFM, it doesn't mean that forest owners are not ready to move. On the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanico. And on this statement, I think we conclude our panel discussion. So thank you so much, all three panelists, and thank you all those who contributed to the discussions and to the questions. Now we move to the concluding remarks. And there we have a distinguished speaker, Petri Sarvamaa, who is a member of the European Parliament. And if I remember correctly, he was also part of our last meeting here in Brussels in 2019. Mr. Sarvamaa, he's a spokesperson for forest policy in the EU arena. So he's been very active over the years on forest policy issues in the European Parliament. He has been an active participant in forest-related legislative initiatives for several years as a member of the Committee of Agriculture and Rural Development, and is currently working as a negotiator on the EPP group in the European Committee on the new Forest Strategy 2030 and deforestation and forest degradation reports. So he stays very busy in relation to forestry issues. He's also shortlisted as an MEP of a year in the Agri category. So, honorable member of the European Parliament, if you're connected online, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today. And as a matter of fact, I have indeed been following this seminar from the very first minute, although trying to multitask at the same time remotely with other things. I would have some observations about the whole seminar and what has been said. And first of all, I would also like to point out that I think that whom I can see in the room and who I understand are online, we have again the same phenomenon, which is that those who know the forests and understand the vast, very complex issues that we are talking about are still in the room. I'm not specifically pointing to anyone else, but a problem that I have seen in these discussions over the years is that us who are most deeply into the substance and perhaps have a personal experience like many of you have of forests and managing them, we are talking among ourselves and to ourselves. And when the real challenge is actually in the Commission with political leadership that is now taking us very boldly into an area with goals that we have set for ourselves, and also the leading heads of units, deputy heads of units, etc. And I would like to start actually my concluding remarks with not quoting word for word, but sort of like overviewing of the message of Mr. Satunas, the head of cabinet for Commissioner Sankievicius. We heard the usual things that I have to say, unfortunately, I have tried to toughen myself and get accustomed to hearing. And what I'm referring to is this simplification of things. When actually, if we really want to solve the problems that we have, whether it's the climate goals in general, or more specifically about taking the best possible care of our forests that are immensely important for us in so many respects, not just fighting the climate change, but in an endless variety of things, then if we really want to maximize our efforts, the last thing that we should do is to simplify. In his keynote speech, Mr. Satunas actually pointed to a piece of information that came out last week in Finland about the carbon sinks of 2021. We have every year from the Natural Resources Institute, we have a standard procedure where they give in the springtime or late spring, early summer, they give the very first preliminary overview of one of the 3 or 5, depending on how you want to look at it, key indicators. And this is what we had last week. And I will tell you that when I was watching the TV news of the Finnish broadcasting company, I will not tell you what I was saying to myself, but the executive vice president, first vice president, Honorable Mr. Timmermans, was finally in Finland with his rubber boots, and he was in the forests, and he was being explained about how you sustainably manage forests over decades and eventually over hundreds of years, so that they grow and that they grow healthy, and they grow the carbon sink, and they're able to store the carbon better and more, etc., etc. And what did Mr. Timmermans say? He pointed out to the same thing as the head of cabinet of Mr. Sankevicius. He pointed out to this very preliminary finding that last year in 2021, it looks as if the carbon sink is actually a source of CO2 in Finland. Now, without nobody ever mentioning that there are, of course, many, many reasons for why the amount of fellings vary hugely over years. And this is, by the way, of course, the key reason why the standing LULUCF regulation is a total fiasco, because it was done on a very narrow definition years. And now we are, rightly so, reviewing that regulation, and I'm hoping that it will come out in better shape overall, because it simply doesn't make any sense what we have nowadays. Our Swedish friends there know exactly that the difference between Finland and Sweden in forestry and in carbon sinks is practically nothing. It's zero, but still we managed to get hugely different indicators for Finland and Sweden in the current LULUCF regulation. Now, so we have problems in the legislation, but the biggest problem is that if we keep tooting these propaganda messages about the need to do something, and we base them on this kind of information, it is very, very unfortunate, and it doesn't serve anyone. I don't understand what it actually serves. I would like to quote here a very important and interesting study, which is actually unforeseen. Never before it has been studied, and certainly not to this extent, the carbon sinks of the boreal forests. And we had just very recently, early this year, the results come out. And this particular study looks at this issue over almost 3 decades. And it gathered information from 3 Nordic countries, that is Finland, Sweden, and Norway, and then from Canada, from Alaska, and from Russia. And the findings are astounding. When you remember and keep in mind that the boreal forests represent almost 30%, even 30% of all forests globally, and they cover about 10% of the whole area of this planet. And then when you look at the results, it is very, very clear that in the Nordic countries where the forestry is relatively intense, especially if you compare to the reference countries where all these boreal forests are, we're talking about the boreal forests of this globe, everything, every single tree. And in Russia, 0.1% of the total carbon storage was felled yearly on the average. In Canada, in the managed forests, it was 0.3% of the overall total carbon storage that was felled. In Norway, it was 0.9%, so this is already 9 times more than in Russia. In Finland and Sweden, it was 1.5%. So this is 15 times more than in Russia. It's 5 times more than in Canada in the managed forests. And the results, finally, astounding results. The overall total carbon storage in these 3 countries that where you know the fundamentalist activists would say that we're exploiting the forests. It grew by 35% on the average over these 27 years between 1990 and 2017. So if we want to talk about carbon sinks, as Mr. Timmermans was saying and talking about in Finland to the cameras, then let's talk about it, but let's please use the data and the scientific research that we have. Because otherwise, what we are discussing simply doesn't make any sense. We might as well all go home and, you know, just let this be. But of course, that's not what I'm going to do, and I don't think anyone there is going to do that either. But so just to sum it up, I mean, and now comes the familiar part, and you've heard these words too many times in your lives, and especially during the last few years. It's about management. The forests have to be managed if we want to do any of these things that the Commission is rightly wanting us to do. It's rightly so. But how do we do it? We manage the forests. We have to make them resilient. The only way to make forests resilient is to manage them. We have to promote now and much more in the future, we have to promote sustainable forest bioeconomy. And of course, the long-lived products are coming, but also with the innovations, the short-lived products are, if not equally, but in this whole package, they are absolutely needed and essential. And there, of course, I'm referring to all these incredible innovations that just keep coming from the researchers and laboratories funded by the big forestry companies, because they have the money and they have the interest to fund these projects and these innovations. So it is a very, very complex and multifaceted and multidimensional circle that we are looking at, and where the carbon sinks are actually only one dimension of this equation. And of course, we have to protect the last remaining primary and old growth forests in Europe. That goes without saying, but my dear friends, this we have to do, but this is not the thing that is going to solve our problems and have an answer to our challenge. How do we look at the forests, and what do we do with the forests to be able to answer and give solutions to the challenges and to the things that are needed, and at the same time take care of the biodiversity. So maybe one last thing, which is also a very important part of this equation. Dear Commission, dear DG Envy, dear DG Klima, one size does not fit all. And this should be basic. This is, I am, time after time, I am absolutely, I could even say that I'm horrified by the fact that this kind of basic approach is not, for some reason, is just not simply taken. But time and over again in the legislative files that we've been dealing with, you see this trend towards trying to put one size glove to us all, and where in fact, if we would really look at the facts and honor the science and the forest science, north of Europe does one thing with their forests, which of course are, by the way, totally different forests than the forests that we have in the west of Europe or in the south, whatever we have there. The east they have their own problems, of course, that are mostly about the resilience, which is not there at all. In some cases, there is something, but I mean, if we look at the whole picture of European forests and forests in the European Union member states, as I would also like to underline, they are the forests in the member states, mostly owned by private forest owners. Unfortunately, sometimes when I look at the legislative proposals, it seems like somebody totally forgot this little fact that if you want to do anything about these things, you have to start from looking at it from this perspective. My dear friends, finally the headline of this seminar, Trilemma. So this really is a trilemma, but the solutions that we are that so many try to offer now actually do not serve the whole question or the whole idea of that we have a trilemma, because trilemma needs a balanced equation, a balanced solution where the three holy corners of this pyramid are equally respected. And they are the environmental, there's including the biodiversity, the economic, and the social plus cultural aspect. So I'm not even going to start to talk about berry picking, in my member state where 60% of people go to woods, to the forests, to pick berries and put them in the freezer. They don't go to Carrefour to buy them, or to Tesco. They go to the forests. So let's please keep some kind of sense and balance in these discussions. And I really want to thank you all for having me there. And it's been a really fulfilling morning, these 3 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Sarvamaa. Thanks for your contribution, useful contribution to the debate today. And thanks also for, as you mentioned, following very closely this PROFOR forest from the very beginning. And I think on behalf of the forestry community, I would like to thank you also for being so active on forestry and forest-related issues in the European Parliament. I think you're doing a very, very good job promoting forest issues on the policy agenda. Now I would like to turn back to our audience, both online and here physically in the room. As the moderator, I've been given a few minutes to summarize, to close the event. And I've taken my notes, of course, during the day, and it was a very interesting and rewarding discussion. As a first point, what I realized, and these are, of course, my personal views and my personal notes, is that we are in this process of rebalancing. And I think it is unavoidable. We all know, we have seen over the last 2 or 3 years with emergence of COVID, with emergence of a war, that priorities may change, and sometimes they may change overnight. So what is the most important probably is to have a robust and solid and transparent and inclusive and whatever, there are many words to name it, process of priority setting and rebalancing these priorities. And what I understand from today's discussion, there are two very important aspects in this process as far as scientific community is concerned. So one, and we heard today many times, is the need of solid scientific knowledge base, need of reliable data and good explanation of the data. So we heard several comments today that the statements are made, but then the question is immediately based on what data. Are these data reliable? Where do they come from? But the second important aspect where we need contribution of research community, and I see this increasingly becoming important, is contribution of social scientists, contribution on how to set the priorities, how to run the process. And what we heard today mentioned many times is communication. So yes, we're communicating very well among ourselves. We know the issues, we have many debates, but what about the others? What about the broader audiences? What about society? What about the stakeholders? What about policymakers who are not part of this debate? However, they influence and they set very important decisions, which in return apply to the forest sector. So this is my first observation. Then I noted many smaller, I would quote certain statements, which I found very interesting. Really, I was struck by intervention saying that several colleagues who've been here for many years dealing with forest policy, they observed that there has never been so many initiatives in forestry. So I think this tells all of us that we're living very exciting times. Those who are dealing with forestry, forest lobbies, Gregorio dealing, having thing over recently, forestry, you just mentioned yourself, we're so busy, there are so many things happening, and I think this is very good, but it makes it very difficult for us. On the other hand, it gives us many opportunities to contribute, and it shows that I think all of your work is very much needed. I was very happy to hear that Gregorio mentioned that in the EU, you promote a discussion on forestry in the Rural Development Network. I think this is very welcome. And I think we should reiterate the message to the broader forestry community that in the countries, in the national rural development networks, please be more active, please be heard and participate. And of course, the Commission, in this context of multiple initiatives, I think many important work is forthcoming. So we heard about certification of carbon removals, which would be quite important milestone for all the foresters in the coming months. People manage forests, and those people who manage forests, they do it with a goodwill. I think that is important for all of us to keep in mind, because sometimes we tend to forget this. We look at forest ecosystems, fine, we look at different management methods, but what about these people who protect these ecosystems, who apply these different management methods? The only certainty is uncertainty. That shows how times have changed. And for forestry, I think it's a revolution, because we all know we grew up, we were taught by saying, okay, forest, we look at the 100 years perspective, it takes forever until trees grow, but then it's very difficult coming back to those who manage the forest. How can they live in this environment when the only certainty is that things will change tomorrow, things will change next week? It was a bit sad to hear that forests in some countries, they're becoming net carbon source, but not sink. But then again, we come back to the debate we just heard. We came back to the data, based on what data in which countries. And then I think there we should look into more details. What was interesting to me to hear is as you mentioned, we plant trees today for the future climate conditions. So, and that contributes to this fact of uncertainty with changing climate. We do not know. We plant the pine trees and pine soil, pine habitat, but then we don't know whether this habitat will be suitable in 10 years from now. Maybe it will be too dry, maybe it will be too wet. And you mentioned also the importance of solid wood products in the context of carbon sequestration, because I think that most of us, we agree we can balance priorities until the time of tree harvesting. When the tree reaches harvesting age, then the challenge starts. Do we protect this tree for biodiversity? Do we cut this tree for whatever purpose, cut it into chips and burn it, or do we produce a solid wood product out of this tree? So I think this is where the challenge begins. Sustainable financing, I think that is very important, because we need to keep in mind that unfortunately, so money drives many things in this world, and then when it comes to the forest owners, whether to protect or mobilize wood, they need incentives. The incentives have to come from the market. And sometimes it is market, and sometimes it has to be policy contribution. Homogenization for efficiency, that was in the past, and now heterogeneity, adaptive capacity for resilience. I think this is our new motto, and then we should all live with this. And then finally, one size does not fit all. I think this is an important message to all of us, that forests in Europe are very diverse, and then solutions are also very diverse. So unless the organizers would have any additional announcements, no, this is not the case. So I would like to thank all the participants. Thanks to those who joined us online. Sorry for the misunderstanding in the very beginning, but it only shows how popular this event was, that the hackers tried to intervene and to take it over. And thanks to all of those who managed to come here physically, and those who need to travel back home still today. Have a safe trip. So thanks to all, and then we close the event. Thank you.